Turtle Logo lesson number 2 in the advanced series, moving with variables and sprites. In this lesson, what we're going to do is create not just one, but 2 different objects that are of type turtle, or turtle objects, and we're going to learn how to move them around the screen. Once again, all our programs always begin with the onStart block, and any code that is inside the onStart block will be executed as soon as our game console starts running, so as soon as you hit the run button. In this lesson, what we're going to be having is 2 different turtle objects show up on our screen, and since we're going to have 2 of them, we need to create 2 variables to hold these objects, and I'm going to call my variables my duck and my apple, since it's going to hold a sprite of type with a duck or an apple. So we're going to click on the variables menu item again, and we're going to make a new variable. Once again, we use proper naming convention for our variables. The first letter of the first word begins with a small. Every other first letter of every word begins with a capital, and there's no spaces between the words. And you create a nice descriptive name for your variable. You'll only have to type it in once, so it doesn't need to be short form. You don't ever use single letter characters as variable names. That's bad style. So we have one variable called my duck, and we're going to create another one called my apple. Now that we have our 2 variables, we're going to set these variables to be of type turtle object, and then we're going to assign sprites to these turtle objects so that they actually show up over in our game console. So we're going to go to the turtle menu, and we're going to drag out the set block, and remember that this block, if you strip it apart, is very much like, it's actually identical to this block right here, because we're taking our variable, in this case by default it puts in my turtle, but we're going to replace that with our variable name, and we're assigning it some value. So by default it tries to put in the number 0. We're going to be putting in the object, turtle object, and we're going to be assigning it a sprite. So the first one we're going to call the duck, and we're going to be assigning the sprite for this turtle object to be a duck. Once we have that all done, we can take that and add it into our onStart block, and you will notice once you run your game console over here, the duck will show up. We're going to create our second turtle object. We're going to assign it to the variable my apple, and we're going to assign the sprite for this turtle object to be an apple. So when we run our game console right now, both the duck and the apple show up in the exact same location, and we're going to learn how to move them around so that one doesn't go on top of the other. So you can actually move your objects around, and they will by default leave a white trail. To do that, we use this new block called my turtle move forward, and by default we put in a number called, and it's 25. So it's 25 steps or pixels, little tiny lights on our game console. So once again, we can't use my turtle because the variables we are using are called my duck and my apple. We haven't created an object called my turtle. So we're going to select my duck, and you'll notice that you can either move it forwards and backwards. So the duck, we're going to move forwards 25 steps, and we're going to place that under here. So it's going to create both our objects, and then it's going to move just the duck forwards. So if we run our program now, you can see that the duck moves forwards and it leaves a little white trail. We want to do the same thing for our apple, so I'm just going to duplicate this. We're going to reference our my apple variable, and instead of moving forwards, we're going to move backwards 25 steps. So our sequence in our program right now, we are creating a variable called myDuck, making it a turtle object, and it has the sprite of a duck. We're creating a variable myApple of type turtle object, and its sprite is the apple. Then we take our variable myDuck, and we're asking it to be moved forward 25 steps. Then we're taking our variable myApple and we're moving it back 25 steps, and that's what's happened in our game console. Next thing we're going to do is, instead of just leaving these default values at 25, you can actually go in and change these values. So we're just going to change them to something different and see that our objects, our turtle objects, will move in the amount of distance that we've asked them to. So they can move forwards or they can move backwards in any distance that we choose. So success. Now you've learned not only to create objects of type turtle object, assign them to variables, you can now make them move around on your game console for you. So the assignment that I'm going to get you to do is to remove these blocks, delete your variables. Remember, you can delete a variable by alternate clicking on it and then saying delete. So I'm going to get you to create 2 new variables with proper names, assign them to turtle objects like we did here, and then get the turtle objects to move forwards, backwards, and then say, I just moved. And that's it for this lesson.